Are we ready, clocks?
Yes.
Good.
I'm turning Wilson.
I can't concentrate now. I keep looking at these.
You get to tap as well, mate.
I know. I'm just trying to choose which one I like. I like that ball with the eyeball there. Great, smells from a grave. Who did the grave? That's a grave.
That's
They're very high quality this year. Anyway, I digress. To begin. Every year, the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which is the organisation that I am the zoological director of, runs a convention, third weekend in August, called the Weird Weekend. And not last year but the year before, we were quite privileged to get hold of a Ukrainian biologist called Gregory Panchenko. Actually finding him and getting hold of him was as hard as looking for a mystery animal. Finding this guy and tracking him down. We finally got hold of him and brought him over for the first time to England, and it was the first time we had a non-English speaking, well, someone whose first language wasn't English, first time we got someone like that to lecture for us. He's a very well-respected scientist who has spent the last 14 years or so in the Caucasus Mountains of Western Russia in a region called Kabardino-Balkaria, studying what is known as the relic hominid, or almasty. Relic hominid is what we think is a very close relative of human beings, in fact a very primitive form of human being, rather than something like the Yeti or the Sasquatch, which are liable to be species of upright walking ape. This is much more closely related to man, and technically it would be of the genus Homo rather than the hominid. And what is interesting about this is Gregory himself, who is not an amateur, he is a full-time and highly respected scientist, has seen this creature twice, close up. The most interesting encounter he ever had was back in 1988, when a farmer had told him that something was coming into his barn at night and messing around in the mane of an elderly mare he kept there. So Gregory ensconced himself in this barn under a load of hay, waited for nightfall and fell asleep. He woke up thinking he wasn't alone, and a strange noise, and he described it as like the twittering of a bird interspersed with something sounded like it was smacking its lips, like that. And looking out in the moonlight, he saw a bipedal, heavily muscled creature, no taller than the average man, but immensely powerfully muscled, covered with greyish hair, back to him, and it was playing around with the mane of this horse, and the horse didn't seem to mind too much, but it was plaiting the hair like a child playing, and every so often it made this noise and twitter like a bird, and it leapt up in one leap onto a beam running across the barn, and then out through an open window, and he was about 10 feet away from it. That was the closest he had ever seen one. He's been studying them for about 14 years, and I was reading some of his articles in which he was saying he believes that the population is on the increase because of sightings of not only single creatures but small family groups and youngsters. So it was decided that last year's expedition, we do at least one foreign expedition in search of a cryptid or monster, if you like. Every year it was decided that last year we would go to Russia and team up with Gregory. So we flew out to Kabardino-Balkaria, which is down near the borders with Georgia. It was the place where they had all the punch-ups not so long ago. we got out there about 2 weeks before all the argy-bargy started, luckily. And there was a team of 5 Brits, 2 Ukrainians and a Russian, and a Russian dog as well, called Hummer, who came with us on all our adventures. Gregory leading the Russian/Ukrainian team and me leading the British team. Our first port of call was a series of mountains in the Lesser Caucasus which are called the Stepmother's Teeth, because from a distance they look like ragged, rotting teeth, and they're the sort of thing you'd expect to see in Mordor. They're absolutely incredible, swathed with mist and these jagged peaks coming out of them. Now Gregory had been there for about 2 weeks before we arrived, doing some groundwork, and in a shallow cave he'd come on part of a skull, not a full skull, but part of a cranium, that looked human, but seemed to be too thick. It was very thick, very much thicker than an ordinary human being. We thought it could be a human being that had some sort of medical condition that made their bones thicker, or possibly an almasty. So he bagged it up ready for us. It was only a few years ago that an actual road was built up to this area, and the road bisected a number of ancient tombs there. There's about 1,000 Summation tombs, these people called the Summatians. And the roads actually ran through a lot of these tombs, so where our camp was, there were literally skulls and femurs sticking out of the earth on either side of our camp and occasionally tumbling down. And it's by turns an archaeologist's paradise and nightmare, because so many of these tombs have been wrecked, but there's so many tombs in the area. Gregory was showing me how some farmers had got a tractor and pulled the great stone lid off one of these ancient coffins and rifled the bones therein. Anatoly, who was the archaeologist who was with us, who had also seen the almasty, he'd been excavating this area for about 20 years, and he said he hadn't even scratched the surface. And he showed me all sorts of things he dug up days before we got there, so like bracelets, necklaces, little looking glasses. And we were also shown some strangely shaped skulls, because the Summatians, with their slaves, they bound their heads, so the heads bones grew in a very strange shape. I think the Incas or somebody in South America did something similar, but they got very weirdly shaped skulls, but only the slave class had them. So they had these funny shaped heads. And all of this stuff was around us all the time. So we trekked up the mountain and laid some camera traps. These are sort of motion triggered camera traps, in the hope that we'd get something up there. And we made our camp amidst these graves, and were disturbed at night occasionally by the calls of jackals. And Gregory and Anatoly and the others told me about some of the stories they'd heard in their research. And Gregory said that one man had told him, a farmer, that one of these creatures, the almasty, had come into his farm with a club and beaten a large guard dog to death with this club, walked into his house, grabbed a big Bulgarian cheese and had away back to the mountains with it. Now why an almasty would want to steal and eat Bulgarian cheese is beyond me, because it looks and tastes like rubber. It really is foul. But it seems that they're not too afraid to approach human habitation, unlike the Yeti proper, which seems very misanthropic. It will not go anywhere near human beings. The almasty will approach human habitation. There was another story of a man who saw one near a food store, and he threw a stone at it because he was scared it was going to break into his food store and nick his grain. The creature retreated behind his farmhouse, and then a massive rock came sailing over the house and narrowly missed the man. And in the morning, it was said it took 2 men to actually lift this rock off the floor, which gives you some idea of the strength of this creature. It could lift up a rock that it took 2 ordinary human beings to just move off the floor and fling it right the way over a house. We made several trips up into the mountains. Nothing turned up on the camera traps, only the rising and setting of the sun, and occasionally grass being blown around by the wind. Gregory had been contacted by a man from another area closer to the borders of Georgia, a man called Sergit, who said he knew where the body of one of these things was. He said he'd been walking in the mountains about 5 years previously and found an avalanche that had killed one of these creatures. It was a female, so he made a little cairn of rocks over it. He took one of the teeth and left it there. The tooth supposedly had been given to a local wise woman as a charm, but this man apparently said he could lead us to where the body of the almasty was. So we moved from the area we were in, the stepmother's teeth, to another area, Alvarez. And instead of camping out this time, we stopped in some little delightful Moomin-esque shacks that were up in the mountains. and this fellow, we met this guy called Sergey, and he looked rather like Father Ted. And through the translators he said the body wasn't that far up in the mountains, it would be about half an hour's walk. So it was getting late in the day, it was going on for 4 o'clock, but it was summer, there was a lot of light, and I thought, it's only half an hour up the mountain, we'd best, you know, capitalise on this, go up and have a look and see if we can find it. So off we went. Because it was in the foothills, we didn't really need climbing gear or anything. He was just wearing some slip-ons and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up. So off we went into the mountains. And we got up to the snow line, where there's a lot of scree around, and I thought, yeah, this is where it's going to be. It's going to be under this scree somewhere. And it shouldn't be too difficult to find, but this guy Sergey, he kept on walking. So we followed him. It was a bit further than we thought it was going to be. Suddenly we come up on a large boulder, about half the size of this room, and on it there were lots of plaques. I thought that's interesting, it's something to do with mountaineering, look what it is. So I went and had a look at these plaques and photographs, and they were memorials to about 24 people who died on this mountain, which was, by all accounts, hideously dangerous. Now, at one side of the mountain there was a retreating glacier that carved out a sheer cliff, and the glacier would occasionally make ominous rumbling noises. Then there was a bunch of slippery scree, and then there were great sheets of ice and frozen snow. So, we were going up further and further into this mountain that had killed 24 people, dressed like we were having a walk on a Sunday afternoon in the park. Further and further up we went, and we got broken up. Now, one thing you should never do on an expedition is get the team broken up, and we got separated, and mists were starting to come down. Now, at one point we had to traverse this great sheet of ice and snow, and my mate Dr. Chris Clark, who's about half my weight, got across it quite easily. I stepped out, my foot went straight through this ice. Suddenly I'm on my belly, sliding along like a toboggan, backwards towards a 300-foot cliff with jagged rocks at the bottom. So I thought, right, cryptozoologist puree is going to be on the menu unless I do something pretty soon. So I swung myself around on my belly and ran my feet into some scree and slowed myself down enough to stop, got back onto the scree, realised being a bit of a fat bastard and all, I wouldn't be able to get across this sheet of ice. So I had to retreat a bit and wait for the others. Some of the others got up to the alleged area where the body was supposed to be, but by the time they got there it was getting dark, so I had to turn around and come back. On the way back down we got separated again. I took a wrong turn and was walking along this crumbly, dangerous cliff that the glacier had gouged out, at the bottom of which were lots of great sheets and needles of ice. Walking along when suddenly the ground collapses beneath me, leaving me hanging onto some tree roots, Indiana Jones style, literally. So I have to swing my legs up, get them around these roots and haul myself back up, catch my breath. The mountain twice has had a go at killing me in the same day. I get back down to the camp and we have shish kebabs.
You see a doctor about that.
So, like idiots, we decide to go back up the next day to see if we can find this body. Get to about 10,000 feet and on a very dangerous slope, and suddenly I'm having blackouts. Literally, it blacks out. Like the iris of the camera shutting, and I can't see anything. I'm sort of blind on this dangerous mountain, so I think, Jesus, I better when I sit down. I'm not too good with altitude. So I sit there sort of composing myself until my vision comes back. The others go on ahead. Eventually we all come back down again, still no sign of the body. The next day we decide to split up. One team will go into the witnesses, the other team will go back up the mountain again. So I decide, right, this man has tried to kill me 3 times, I'm going to go and interview some witnesses. We talked to a very elderly man in a local village who said that his father had seen an almasty when he was a boy, which would have made it the 1890s. And at the time, part of their house was derelict, the ceiling had fallen in, and he opened the door to this house to this section of the house where the ceiling was falling, and found a young almasty sitting in a chair, and he described it as being covered with brown fur, having wrinkled, leathery sort of skin, thick brow ridge, no real neck chin to speak of. The neck goes straight down into very broad shoulders, red eyes, but he didn't mean glowing, he said red as in highly vascular. And he said it had a great mane of hair across its shoulders and head, and when it saw him it flung its head forward and the hair fell down in front of its face. And he shut the door again, ran to get his parents. By the time they'd come back it had gone. There's also a tradition in the area of immensely big snakes, up to 10 metres, 33 feet long, that are black. And the archaeologist Anatoly told me about how he had seen one when he was in a cave. The one he saw was about 7 metres long, and he saw it swimming away in an underground river when he was caving, but this was further to the south of where we were. He also said that when his father was hunting in Kazakhstan, he had had an encounter with one of these monstrously big snakes in a swamp. He said he saw what he thought was a branch, a tree branch sticking up out of the water, and as he got closer he thought it was a person standing there. And as he got closer still, he realised it was this immense snake holding its head and neck up out of the water. And Gregory thinks a lot of the so-called lake monsters that are reported from Russia are actually one of these giant snakes, which I think is some form of colobrid, which is a large family of snakes which include all the common snakes like garter snakes and grass snakes, the non-venomous ones, and not the pythons and the anacondas and so forth, but the very large group of your standard snakes. The biggest one we know about is the American indigo snake, which is about 3 metres long. This one is at least 3 times that, if it exists. Anyway, we get back to camp again. I returned just in time to see Dave Archer, who was one of the guys on the team that went up the mountain, coming back carrying a body bag. And I think, oh right, this mountain's won one. It's nobbled one of us. I wonder who it is. He gets back down again, opens the body bag, but it's not. It's a load of vegetation. He was up on the mountain. They didn't find the body, but they found a cave, and in the cave was a nest made out of dwarf rhododendron. And it looked like the rhododendron had been bitten off and made into a nest. It had hair in it. So we put on our gloves, our surgical gloves, went through it bit by bit, got all the hair out, bagged it up, ready to take home. So we decided to move on once again, and our third port of call was a little town called Neutrino.
As in the subatomic particle?
Yeah, yeah. It's named because the experiments were done in that area, so they named the little village that sprung up Neutrino. Now, it's a village, a tiny little village, but it's not made out of cottages and things. It's made out of really grim, depressing sort of Soviet bloc high-rises. Most of them are empty. Some of them weren't even finished because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the ones that are inhabited, the electricity and the hot water only work about half the time. So all of us crammed into this tiny little flat, this little malodorous, snide flat, as one of the fellows called it. And we used that as our base of operations. Now, one of the guys that was with us, a fellow called Keith, he was out on the little veranda overlooking some allotments, and he said, "There's a cow here eating a fire." There's a cow here and it's eating a fire. So I went to investigate, and there was indeed a brown cow eating a fire. Now, cows roam all over this village and they walk into people's flats and things and nobody seems to mind. But this cow was happily tucking into a fire and really enjoying it and drooling while it was doing it. Another cow came along and tried to join the cow's meal, but the first cow chased the second cow away because it wanted to keep the fire all to itself. We stood watching this cow eating a fire for quite some time. We went into the mountains outside of Neutrino. These mountains are quite beautiful and spectacular, and it's really jarring to see these scenes of glory, and then you look down and there's this hideous loads of vile flats. It's very bizarre. But we went up into the mountains because we wanted to have a look where there'd been a recent avalanche, just in case there were any more bodies. Another thing that's supposed to happen is avalanches will kill animals and then the almasty will scavenge off the carcasses. So we're going to have a look there and see if there were any dead bodies, anything the almasty could have scavenged off. And myself, Dr. Chris Clark, Adam Davis and Gregory Panchenko were going, and one of the archaeologists, not Anatoly, a guy called Alexei, who was the owner of the dog, Huma, who was a cross between a spaniel and a red setter, and she was absolutely lovely. I love dogs, they're ace. Cats are shy. Anyway, he had gone on ahead, and then we went out about an hour afterwards to go to these mountains. And we're in the foothills in quite a heavily wooded area. Suddenly there's a sort of roaring noise from a bush. And I know it's not a bear, I've heard bears, this is not the noise a bear would make. And Gregory stops and says, I don't recognise that, that's no animal I know of. And the roaring carried on, and this bush got louder. So we all got pretty excited, whipped our cameras out, and we all broke into a sort of pincer movement and surrounded this bush. And I thought, at any minute now, a rock is going to come sailing out of there. And then a relic hominid is going to be there, and I'm going to nail him on camera. We got closer and closer, and suddenly, out from this bush comes Alexei, who had been hiding in the bushes waiting for us, ready to shoot us up. I saw the funny side of it. Gregory wasn't very pleased. He could have got himself shot if someone had a gun. Anyway, we went up into the mountains again, and Gregory told us there might be a few streams we'd have to traverse, so we'd probably get our boots wet, but hey, we're real men, we don't mind. So there was indeed a few streams we had to cross, and as we got higher into the mountains, these streams were a little bit wider and a little bit more rapid, and then eventually these little streams we had to cross had become raging, murderous torrents over slippery rocks. And going across one of them, we got a log and heaved it across to try and use it as something to hang on to. I got halfway across. The power of the water, which was just phenomenal, swept my legs from under me. I went shooting off towards the rocks. Luckily, Gregory managed to grab me around the back of the neck and haul me out, because I would have been smashed to bits on the rocks. Then Dr. Chris Clark, who must weigh about 8 stone soaking wet, he got taken away like a leaf on this rapid, and thankfully we managed to get hold of him as well. But the little streams that Gregory had told about were not little streams, they were murderous rivers. So we climb across jagged, slippery, awful rocks right up to the avalanche, and it's pulped the tree line. There's one very rancid dead cow there. No self-respecting almasty would go anywhere near it. So that was a bit of a washout. And by my count, Russia had tried to kill me 4 times now. They'd have to try a bit bleeding harder for someone from the north. I'll tell you, bastard country. Anyway, that particular night we were going to stake out an old abandoned farm. And the backstory to this farm was that in 1973 there was an old couple living there, and the old man had amassed quite a bit of money, and he was going to spend it on something, nobody really knows quite what, but 3 of his younger relatives appeared at the farm. There was a bit of an altercation. One of them knifed the old man to death. His wife grabbed hold of the knife, knifed the murderer to death, then the 2 remaining guys beat the crap out of this old woman, then knifed her to death, stole all the money and ran off into the mountains and were eventually found by the police. So after that nobody lived in it, and the building itself, it consisted of 3 rooms surrounded by a sort of L-shaped veranda and with lots of little outbuildings that were still standing. About 8 years before, Anatoly, the archaeologist, had been hiding out there, and he'd seen an almasty walk by at a distance of about 10 feet, and he described it as being grey in colour, grey fur, thick-set shoulders, no real neck, head sitting on straight onto the shoulders, long hair, and it moved past swinging its arms. More recently still, about 5 years ago, 3 shepherds were there, just using it as a place to sit and drink and talk one night on the veranda. When the door to the veranda opened, a massive male almasty comes in, grabs the first guy, picks him up like he's a doll, just moves him out of the way, walks along to the end of the veranda, jumps off the veranda and disappears into the night. So there have been several sightings around this particular area. So we decided to stake it out. Anatoly, myself, Dave Archer, Adam Davis. We set up camera traps. Anatoly brewed up some red wine and honey because the smell is supposed to attract the almasty for some reason. Brewed it up and left cups of this in several places. Some meat was left out. And then we all ensconced ourselves in various parts of this farmhouse and just waited. And I sat just looking out into the darkness, waiting for something. Around about 10 o'clock at night, there was a noise like a twittering of a bird. And then one of the camera traps goes off. Anatoly gets a bit excited about this and goes out looking around the outbuildings and doesn't come back. We think, where the hell's he gone? The hours creep by, it starts getting colder. We light a little stove and go into one of the rooms for a while. Dave Archer fell asleep on this manky bed that was there, and myself and Adam Davis were warming ourselves by the little stove. There was a door about 7 feet tall, and it was about 3-4 inches open, and moonlight and starlight was streaming in because it was a good clear night. It was about 2:30 in the morning when we hear a deep guttural vocalisation. The nearest I can get to it phonetically is sort of "buh-buh-buh-buh," but much more throaty sounding. And I look at Adam. You hear that? Yeah. Then, shortly afterwards, about 25-30 seconds after the vocalisation, something walks along the veranda and walks past the door, and it blocks out the starlight and moonlight that's coming through, and it blocks it out to a height of 7 feet. And I said, did you just see something go past the door? Adam nods. We grab our cameras, we rush out, but there's nothing except darkness and silence. Something went along there, something big enough to block out the starlight to a height of 7 feet. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was as swift and silent as a cat. It was gone into the night. In the morning we have a look round, we finally find Anatoly, who's spent the night in one of the outbuildings. We were worried he'd been nobbled by a bear or something. We take the camera traps back and have a look at them in the flat. All they've caught is just branches moving in the wind. We stake it out the next night, but nothing happens except me having strange dreams about being strangled by something with long blue fingers. Go back to the flat again. We're discussing the expedition so far when the door bursts open and a gaggle of Bulgarian women come in who look like very stereotyped Russian peasants with the little scarves around their heads and with like spotted hankies, and start gabbling away in Bulgarian. And it turns out the person who had rented this flat to us for the weekend wasn't the owner of the flat. They just rented it out without the owner's permission. And one of these women was the owner. It looks like we were going to get booted out for a while, but Gregory calmed them down and they did some sort of deal and let us carry on to stay in the flat. So we widened our search a bit more and talked to some more witnesses. One of them was the Deputy Director of Elbrus National Park, a very well-educated man, a geologist by training. And he said that about 5 years previously he'd lost some sheep. Some sheep had got out from a pen and run off into the woods, and he'd gone looking for them, and he showed us the exact area it happened. And he saw something, it was twilight, and he saw something lying down. He thought it was a cow lying on the floor, when suddenly the cow stood up, and it was this huge man-like figure. And he thought at first it was a very big man, and he shouted to a Bulgarian, "Have you seen some sheep go by here?" No answer. He shouts to it in Russian, "Have you seen some sheep go by here?" No answer. He gets closer and notices it's got this high domed head with a big sagittal crest. The almasty is supposed to have this head shape, look very like a gorilla's, this sort of cone shape, which seems to indicate a sagittal crest to anchor big powerful jaw muscles. Covered in black fur. And so he calmed himself down, didn't panic, because he wasn't acting aggressively. He just backed off very slowly and tried to go and get his uncle, so he could show his uncle this creature. But as he was running away to get his uncle, he looked back over his shoulder and saw the creature running off up the mountain, so by the time his uncle got there, it had gone. Another man, pardon me, claims to have seen family groups of almasties, what he thinks is a male, a female, and a couple of youngsters on several occasions. He says the big male is black, and the youngsters and the females were a bit more grey in colour. On one occasion he said he saw one entering an abandoned house, and he had a couple of German tourists there, and he wanted to go in after it, but he sort of turned around and grimaced at them, and they were so afraid they wouldn't go in. Pussies. I remember sitting on that veranda at night, staring out into the dark, particularly on the second night I was there, and I had my camera ready with me, and I was thinking, this thing's got a big flash on it. I think, at any minute now, the door at the end of that veranda might open, and this 7-foot thing might come along, and I've got to fire off this flash right into its face. Right, this could be a good way to die. You'll be remembered. You'll be remembered. Anyway, another witness was an old couple who went to their house and interviewed them at length, and the man, the old guy, said just last year he'd been in his kitchen when a stone hit the window. Someone was throwing a stone at the window, and he thought it was his son who'd come to visit, and he shouted, "Come in, the door's open." Another stone hit the window. "Come in, the door's open." And he realised whoever it was taking no notice of him, so he went out into the garden. Once again it was sort of dusk, and he saw what he thought at first was a sack of wool in the corner, and he realised it was a young almasty, about 4.5, 5 feet tall, and he had the thought that it was maybe about 7, 8 years old, and it seemed to be begging for food, so he brought it some bread, and he said he didn't get a good look at the face, but when he reached out with its hand looked perfectly human, and the skin was pale, like our skin, but wrinkled, and fur up to here, but the actual palm and the fingers bare. And he had a feeling, he didn't see it, but he had a feeling there was a second one in the shadows moving about. His wife had seen an almasty back in the 1940s, when, like a lot of the Bulgarians, they were accused of being in cahoots with the Nazis, and they were deported to Kazakhstan for a number of years. And she had visited her brother's house and found her brother's children all in a corner crying. And she asked them what was wrong, and they said, "Look out of the window." And it wasn't a glass window, it was a wooden window, what they're called. Shutters, yeah, that's that exotic word that I forgot, shutters. Shutters. She looked out into the garden and she said she saw this hair-covered creature about the same height as her. She said it was covered with long hair, including the face. She said she couldn't see the facial features because the hair was hanging down over the face. And the way she described it put me in mind of Cousin It. And she said it was moving its arms up and down and making this weird twittering sound like a bird. Every so often it would lean down and pick up some earth and mud and throw it at the side of the house as if it was amusing itself by doing that. And she said she stood and watched it for about 40 minutes, and it was just playing around in the garden, and the children were terrified. And she said at the time she left, it was still there when it was getting dark. This thing was just amusing itself by throwing stuff at the house. Our final place we staked out was an amazing building that looked like it's come straight out of one of Moffat's Doctor Who stories, or possibly Hammer Horror. It was this creepy, it looked like a castle. In fact, it was an old abandoned restaurant that had been built in the early 80s to resemble a Bulgarian castle. So you had a tower and outbuildings. At the time, when it was open, it must have been an absolutely wonderful place to eat at and stay at. But he had this great tower, then all these surrounding buildings looking like a castle, but it was all built in the 80s. And now it's all overgrown. And apparently some police had been there a few nights before and heard this awful screaming noise, and despite being armed, they all basically shat themselves and ran. So, the boys from the CFZ, who are armed with nothing more than a few cameras and good old-fashioned British spunk, we stake it out, stick up our camera traps, and stay there all night in this amazing place, taking turns on watch. Only things we saw that night were bats and rodents, but when we developed well, not developed, but when we downloaded the images from the camera trap, we saw this bizarre humanoid figure on one of them, close up to the camera, with a strangely dome-shaped head. We got excited at first, and then if I looked a bit closer, and then I realised this was an out of focus photograph of me. I set the camera up. Now I'm pretty hairy, but I'm not as hairy as an almasty. So, the saga with the tooth. We went to see the old wise woman that had the tooth, and she ran a restaurant in a little village, and I was expecting a hideous old cackling crone, but she was actually quite an attractive middle-aged woman. And according to her, she didn't have the tooth anymore. She'd taken it back to her children, and they had it in their flat back in Nalchik, which is the largest city in the area. So she rang them up, and they were ransacking the flat trying to find this tooth. They found an old red kettle that they'd lost years ago. They didn't find the tooth, and I was thinking, hang on, if this is supposed to have been used as a magical charm, it's a very cavalier way that they're treating it in. Anyway, Sergit, the guy who said he'd found the body, he turns up again and proclaims, quite straight-faced, proclaims that the body has been dematerialised by jinn, which are Islamic spirits. But not to worry, he has a hair from the queen of all the almasties to give to us, and it's transparently a vegetable fibre. Now, whilst he's translating this, Gregory is translating from him, sort of rolling his eyes. And this guy, he was nuts, but he wasn't after money. He went up that mountain 3 times and dug really hard. And I think he generally believed his own insanity, that he was bonkers. He really was screaming insane. And he was the only one, though, that gave the almasty any kind of supernatural attributes. Everybody else just thought it was an animal, or more often, a primitive form of man. He was the only one that said it had any kind of magical powers, and he was crackers. So the tooth and the body dematerialised. But what we've got hair from the cave, we've got what looked like bone shards, and we'd also found some dung as well in some of these archives. So, we get back to Britain. Samples are sent off to various places. Dr. Scott Diatel, who is a forensic scientist from New York, who often helps the police, identified the hair as coming from a modern human of the ethnic variety in that area. So, that little cave at the top of the mountain, maybe a hunter was using it when he was caught in a storm and stayed there for a while, we don't know. The dung and the bone was sent to Copenhagen University to my old friend Dr. Lars Thomas, who's a fellow cryptozoologist. Dung is mountain goat. The bone, they don't know yet, they're still working on it. So that at the moment is where it stands. So what is the almasty and does it exist? Well, these were just stories from a bunch of peasants. I would have dismissed them as probably folkloric quite a long time ago. But Gregory himself, who is a first-rate scientist, he used to work for the Russian government. He's seen it twice. Anatoly, the archaeologist, has seen it. I think I may have got within 12 foot of one on that abandoned farm. I think the thing exists. What is it? The Russians and the Ukrainians seem to think that it's a surviving strain of Homo erectus, which was the hominid that begat us, begat Neanderthal man, begat the little Homo floresiensis that they call hobbit. He thinks the Russians, the Ukrainians think it's a surviving strain of that creature, but the skulls of Homo erectus don't exhibit this high domed crest on top. So I think it's just another descendant of Homo erectus. The way we're a descendant of Homo erectus, this is another form of man. They're ultra primitive, immensely strong. It doesn't have fire. It only has the most primitive ape-like tool use. Covered in hair, got this thick brow ridge, thick, powerful jaws for masticating tough material. I think it's out there, and I think of all the places in the world that there is a chance we're going to get some good evidence from its Carbonino-Bulgaria, because the things seem to approach human beings and human habitation on a semi-regular basis. Also, they don't seem to have a fear of humans like they have in other places, because no one's shot at them, because they're considered to be a primitive form of human. People don't usually fire upon them. So I think if there's going to be a breakthrough, it's going to be in that area. Hopefully, I'd like to get back either this year or next year to do some more work, because there are a series of caves in the Carboninian area. We were in the Bulgarian area, and there's a series of unexplored caves in the Carboninian area where these things have been seen, and not even Gregory's been there yet. So that would be a thing I'd like to go back and do. But as it stands, we're still waiting on the bone results from Copenhagen. Fingers crossed. It might turn out to be something innocuous. It might turn out to be something interesting. But once again, more questions than answers. Any questions?
Well, bone was the skull that you described that you found at the beginning, yeah?
Yeah.
Different skull.
Yeah. It looks like the back part of the cranium that's human-like in shape, but it's very thick. It's like that.
Are there similar legends in other areas of the Caucasus that you've heard of?
Oh yeah, these things, the almasty, it goes by a number of different names. Almasty, Alma, Albasti, Dev, Wool. There are reports of it throughout the Caucasus region, also in parts of Mongolia, parts of Georgia, the Tian Shan Mountains, but they're much further west than the true Yeti, which is a whole different kettle of fish.
This cow that was eating fire, and
Yes.
there was explanation for that?
Yeah, well, I tried to rationalise this in a scientific manner. I came up with two ideas. Either the cow really likes the taste of fire, or it was going for sort of the mineral content of the burnt up material, the charcoal and stuff. It was licking that up, because cows do eat bone occasionally to get the mineral content. They'll even eat ground nesting birds. Oftentimes animals we think of as vegetarian will take meat. Hippopotamus, for instance, have been seen eating other dead hippopotamus, and even killing antelopes and eating them for the mineral content. Deer will eat ground nesting birds for the content of the bone. So I think it's something similar to that. Or it just loves the taste of fire.
How do you feel about the way your profession is sort of covered by basically by the news coverage? You know, how do you feel that you?
I think you're monkeys. I do what I do, and to hell with anyone else.
No, I realise that.
But
I mean, do you?
the Sun would describe me as a boffin.
Sorry, is that a noun or a verb?
A boffin, when I had a theory about sightings of lake monsters in cold northern lakes actually being of a mutant strain of immensely big
So
eel.
you're a boffin, but they actually like what you're saying. But
I've never really been slagged off by the media,
Yeah.
to be honest.
You've never been called a crackpot
I mean,
then?
it's the truth. I don't know how much coverage you actually have in the wild. I've seen some of your coverage.
We actually get very little coverage. They're more interested in what Paris Hilton's doing.
Which was my second question. Paris Hilton. What sort of species might she be?
Does it exist?
She's, I wish she did. She's
Have you seen
Homo
her school
fatuous
recently?
twat. But we're treated quite well generally. I've lectured at the Natural History Museum and had a standing ovation. I've lectured twice at the Grant Museum of Zoology and had standing ovations. I was there just last Thursday giving a lecture, and the response to that was overwhelming.
Terrific.
So the mainstream scientific world is generally coming around to this idea with the discoveries of things like Homo floresiensis and other large animals that have been discovered.
Wasn't it Cuvier who said something about in 1822?
Yes,
Oh, there's
Cuvier's
no more
Rex
big
Pictum.
animals to find, and they
Yeah, no,
discovered
they found
tapir.
lion tapir just after he said that. The big animals are turning all the time. There's a guy called Van Roosmalen, who's a Dutch guy in the Amazon. He's found 2 new species of tapir, loads of new monkeys, a new dwarf manatee that's only about that long. It's so sweet.
See his diary the following day. Bollocks!
So, and I don't mind calling these things monsters either. Some people object and say you should call them cryptids or unknown animals because monster sort of lowers the tone. But the original meaning of monstrum, is a revelation, which is a great way of describing the cryptid. It's all a matter of funding and the amount of time you can spend in the field. I mean, if I won the lottery, I'd be out there most of the year, somewhere exotic, and somewhere someone will get lucky and will get one of these things. And my own personal opinion is that it's probably going to be by accident. Something will blunder in front of a lorry, or someone will find a carcass when they're knocking down a rainforest.
Richard, I thought we already had that. I mean, that infamously, about 30 years ago, that famous fish was bobbed up.
The coelacanth, that was in the 50s, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, all that thing's been dead for
65
millions of years.
And then just about 5 years ago, there was a second, even bigger species of coelacanth discovered in the Philippines.
So it already happened. We've already seen there's much more out there that you're aware of.
I saw some clippings last week about a bit like a lemur down in
Oh yes, the beast of Falmouth.
Yeah.
Wow, how strange is this? I'm trying to get hold of the witness to talk to him face to face. I've talked to the reporter. The witness saw this thing, he says, looks like a cat, but sort of moving on its hind legs and hopping along. And he did a drawing of it with large eyes, with small front legs. And at first I thought maybe it's a spring hare, which is a type of large South African road. What the hell is it doing in Cornwall? I don't know, unless it got out of a private collection. The more I looked at the picture, I thought, no, it looks more like an eye, which is a weird nocturnal lemur with big eyes and long thin fingers for getting grubs out of holes. But once again, what the hell would that be doing in Falmouth? And I can't see anybody having an eye in a private collection because they're very rare. So I was scratching my head on that. And then somebody mentioned this thing called a twisty cat. I've never heard of them before. So I did some research, and there is a deformity in the domestic cat which causes the bones in the forearms, the radial bones, to be much smaller, deforming the front arms and impelling the animal to hop along on its legs like a kangaroo. And this occasionally happens by accident, but there's some sicko in Texas that's breeding them on purpose, or she thinks they look cute. These hideously deformed cats with tiny little front legs like that. As far as I can see, no one's doing it in Britain on purpose, so maybe this thing is a deformed cat. But then I heard that the guy who saw it said it was 4 to 5 feet tall, which is a really big cat. Unless he's a really bad estimator of size. So I'm waiting, I'm trying to get in contact with him to interview him face to face.
Maybe it's a twisty leopard or something.
God knows what it is, but it's the same sort of area.
Rich Tyrannosaurus cat.
It's the same sort of area that back in the 70s the infamous owl man was seen in. And the owl man's been seen since the mid-70s up to fairly recently. So we've got the owl and the pussycat.
We also get a lot of time spares and cargo ships from all over the world coming into the coast along the Falmouth, so you never know what could be.
Well, maybe it's just an ordinary cat that ate some radioactive waste and is mutating. and eventually it'll attack Falmouth when it's about 100 feet
What,
tall.
cats?
I feel like I'm named after an ace radioactive place.
Georgia.
Just out of curiosity, of all the various monsters and unknown creatures, what would the ones that you would think would be the most likely to exist and the least likely?
Most likely to exist, the Tasmanian wolf, or thylacine, striped carnivorous marsupial, which is I've got on my belt buckle. It's supposedly became extinct in the mid-30s, but it's the healthiest extinct animal you'll ever see. There's been at least 4,000 reports of it since then by zoologists, some of them, and by park rangers. It's even been filmed a couple of times. That's still around in Tasmania, it's still around on the mainland, it's still in New Guinea where it's called Dobsenga. So I think that's a matter of time with that one. The giant anaconda, you know, that they've just found that the huge fossil Titanoboa. Well, there are reports today of snakes considerably bigger. I went to investigate some in Guyana a couple of years ago, but unfortunately there was a drought, so I couldn't get out to the remote lakes where they were. I really hope to get back out there again. They exist. Things like the almasty and the orang pendek, the yeti, I think they exist. The Mongolian death worm, although its powers are apocryphal. All that is either a big sand boa or a big worm lizard. It's one unknown to science, but it's had all sorts of folklore grafted onto it. Like things like the gorilla. They used to say the gorilla could do all sorts of weird things like wrestle with elephants and
carry off 4 aces out of a deck of cards.
Carry off native women to have its wicked way with them, and we know it doesn't do those. But yeah, the death worm exists. The legends of dragons are just so pervasive in every single culture on Earth, and there are a surprising amount of modern day sightings, particularly in Asia. But they're associated with water. They're serpentine creatures associated with the element of water rather than the element of fire. So a lot of the things that we describe as sea serpents and lake monsters today, I think they were actually the original dragons. They exist wherever they are, some sort of elongate reptile, maybe a descendant of the Thalattosaucian crocodiles. The ones that I don't think exist, Deloy's ape, famous photograph, you may have seen it, sitting on a crate like that, propped up with a stick. It's supposedly a huge ape that attacked a group of Venezuelan explorers. There's a pair of them that attacked them by shitting in their own hands and then lobbing them like chimpanzees do, and they shot the female. And it's supposed to be this undiscovered species of South American ape. It's not, it's just a large red-faced black spider monkey. It's just a dead spider monkey on a stick. And to make it look bigger, they've made the crate look smaller by taking one of the planks off the crate. You can tell it's a spider monkey by its tiny vestigial thumbs and its large external clitoris. That is a load of old cobblers. What else is cobblers? Sadly, I think surviving dinosaurs, except for the ones that have feathers and say tweet, are highly unlikely. The Mekele Mbembe in the Congo probably exists, but it's more likely to be a gigantic monitor lizard than a sauropod dinosaur. The Loch Ness Monster is certainly not a plesiosaurus, a surviving plesiosaurus. It's more likely to be Elvis in a rubber suit. It's probably some sort of large fish like an eel or a giant catfish or a sturgeon. It's certainly not a prehistoric reptile in a cold northern lake. So those are the ones I believe in, those are the ones I think are a load of cobblers. The giant grouse of Oakhampton it's supposed to be 3 miles long and shoot laser like its thighs. No one's ever seen it or even reported it until I just made it up. So, and some of these things could just maybe be a bunch of hamsters that people have gaffer taped together for a while.
Sadly, the giant grouse of the Wikipedia by its well, possibly.
So I've got a Wikipedia page, and some bastard, it was Odo. What's his real name, Odo? Sorry?
You mean the actor or?
No, Odo used to come to, what's his name? Is it Simon?
I think so.
Simon is a guy who used to come to Science Fiction Society, and they called him Odo because he looked a bit like the character. He went on my Wikipedia page and altered it.
Well, you muffed into a bucket.
Altered it purposefully to say that I love Star Trek. I love cats. And my favourite actor is Bruce Willis. Which are the three things I just cannot stand. Thankfully, he didn't mention Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or I'd have to have gone round to his house with a love hammer and killed him.
You mentioned the French either.
Did he? I think he might have mentioned the French. It was a while ago he did that. The rascal. Is that you lot? Any more questions? About anything? Sheds, jam, rainboard.
Any new places you're thinking of going to?
I want to go back to Guyana to get to this remote lake we couldn't get to. The last time we went at a really terrible time of year when there was an awful drought. I mean, the river was too low for us to get to the remote lake where this absolutely titanic anaconda is supposed to have its lair.
But I'm saying like a place you haven't been to before.
Oh, a place I haven't been to. Japan. I'd love to go to Japan. There's so much in Japan, and we've got the most beautiful women in the world as well. And my next book, which is out sometime in spring, The Great Yokai Encyclopedia, is all about Japanese monsters from Japanese folklore, which is really freaky. You get things like giant carnivorous sea cucumbers that grow out of a girl's knickers. You get bipedal, flesh-eating rabbits that dig up corpses and eat their livers. You get flaming pigs that run between your legs and steal your genitals. Japanese folk.
We're just about everything.
Wait, Richard, we've seen all this. The Mothra, Rodan. Yeah, there's film evidence.
But the Japanese just think, well, what were they on? Most folklore, you can see, yeah, I can see where that comes from. It's got a basis in this, that, other. But the Japanese, you're just scratching your head and think, Christ, who came up with this?
Must have been some rotten sushi or something.
Genitals involved in this.
Yeah.
Japanese stuff.
Yeah, and things that eat hair or lick your hair. There's a lot. And the other place is Australia. The other place would be Australia and Tasmania and New Guinea. The whole of sort of Australasia is alive with weird stuff.
What, bunyips and stuff like that?
Thylacines, yowies, which is the Australian ape man, giant lizard sightings, giant crocodiles, giant snakes.
Giant spiders.
And New Guinea still largely unexplored.
New Guinea is one of the most explored places in the world. Either there or Bridlington.
Or what?
Either there or Bridlington.
What is a yowie exactly?
A yowie,
Yeah.
it's an Aboriginal term. They've got lots of names for them. The yowie is the preeminent one. It's a creature not dissimilar to the almasty that is seen in Australia. Now, in Australia, there are very few placental mammals. There are a few bats and rodents, and other stuff that's been brought by the Aborigines, because it was all marsupials before. The Aborigines brought the dingo over and other things like that. But way back in Aboriginal legend, there's this talk of these ape men called the giant ape-like men called the yowies, and they've been seen since the time of the first colonists. I know some yowie witnesses, and some of the eyewitness testimony is fantastic from Australia. How the hell they got there, we don't know.
Well, Floriensis got to Flores.
Floriensis got to Flores, yeah.
And it was only like a 60-mile gap between, the Sunda and Wallachia.
Mm. One theory is that they raft, they go over on, hanging onto logs and things, usually by accident when there's a flood or a tsunami or something. Animals get washed to places where they don't usually exist, and then if there's a niche there for them, and there's enough of them there to form a breeding colony, they get established. Anybody else? Oh, you again. What's your name, love?
My name's Catherine. How come they see not when people have witnessed the almasty, they're always in groups or single?
Not always.
And a lot of the time,
Yeah,
we said
small
that a
family
few of them
groups,
have been really groups.
yeah.
How come when other things like Sasquatch are being seen elsewhere,
Yeah.
they're always singular? How come that?
Because we think things like the Yeti and the Sasquatch are different. They're more closely related to the orangutan. They may be a surviving form of a giant Pleistocene ape called Gigantopithecus blacki that's known only for its jaws and teeth, but judging by the size of them, it would have been a good 10 feet tall and probably bipedal. So the orangutan is solitary and comes together only to mate. These things are more closely related to human beings, which are more social.
Do we think these things are actually dying out, or they still get? I mean,
Well,
I mean, the thing is, if there aren't that many, we don't see that many of them. Although obviously, as we encroach more and more upon their territory, we may do.
were you talking specifically about the almasty?
Well, I think perhaps you think about like the Sasquatch. So obviously, America expands. You know, and I was discussing earlier in the bar with you, for the young lady behind the bar. We have actually seen the end of the Neanderthals, because there may have been, there may have been some sort of Neanderthal follow-on that had, generations who died out less than 20 years ago. Are we seeing the end days of the Sasquatch? I mean, these creatures actually are out there. Are there enough of them to actually form a proper procreating society that will carry on here for generations to come?
Well, with the Sasquatch, it's hard to say. There's just not enough data. There's a hell of a lot of sightings which suggest, even if the majority of those sightings are mistakes, it suggests there's enough still to be seen and noticed. And there's a hell of a lot of wilderness in Canada and the northern states. But with the almasty, we think it's on the increase in Carbonino-Bulgaria anyway.
There's more almasty than used to be.
Yeah. Same with the Tasmanian wolf. There's more sightings than there used to be. And there was a computer program called BioClim. Dr. Henry Nix developed it. And what you do is it was a tool for zoologists. You feed in everything you know about a particular species, and you feed in everything you know about the geography of a certain area. It matches it up, and it shows where in this area the animal is most likely to be found. And he did it for the thylacine, just as an experiment. And he said that there was something like a 98% match between where the computer program predicted they would be seen on Tasmania and where people were reporting them from.
So at some point these things may sort of knock on our doors.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm here, as opposed to you're saying, I reckon they're out there.
Yeah.
I've got loads of evidence, but people go, well, possibly may not be.
And like I say, I think it's going to be more by look and judgment.
Mm.
I get one of those things.
I was going to ask about the whole Bigfoot thing, since there is no evidence of hominids or any of our relations, or near relations, in the Americas, North America, before humans. Where do you think that came from?
They may have come across the Bering Strait when there was a land bridge. I mean, until recently we thought the Indians were the first people there, but there was a skeleton found, there was just one skeleton, and that was biologically closer to the Ainu people of northern Japan than anywhere else. So it's thought they got there even before the Indians. So other creatures might have used the bridge as well. Right, I think it's time for the pub, isn't it?
I couldn't sit there all night. It's really tiring just holding it.